Greg Vierman, Principal and Executive Creative Director with Astronaut Studio at the Charge Energy Branding Conference in Houston, Texas, joined by some good friends, old and new.
I am Geoffrey Abraham. I am also Creative Director and Principal at Self Brand Studio, and we are joined right now by some like-minded folks. Tell us your story.
So I'm Paul Ziedler. I'm a creative director and a partner at Storyline Partners. And Storyline Partners is a brand consultancy, and we help clients construct the strategic narratives they need to succeed using a unique model called Story Logic. And I guess that's kind of where Ed and I met on is, I'm an ad guy like yourself, like yourselves. And Ed is a brand strategist, so we met at an agency, and we kind of hit it off on this idea of story, using narrative structure to help position brands, help them find their narrative and how to essentially grow and succeed.
Yeah, well, as Paul was saying, we met at a previous agency. We kind of landed on narrative because I used to be a strategist in a branding agency, and I had one of those changes of mind. I thought, I think I want to be a novelist. And so I did a creative writing course, and I thought it would be about writing, but it was actually about story. And I was using brand onions and brand pyramids, which I just wasn't satisfied with. And then I saw these new structures, and I said, wait a sec, these look a lot like brand onions, but just a lot better. Why don't we just move them over? And so I didn't end up with a novel, I ended up with an agency.
It sounds like the ROI on your novelist class turned out to be all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, fascinating. I want Greg to take over some of the questions, but I do just want to ask, what brings you to a energy branding conference? What is that a strong niche for you guys?
Yeah, we've worked with quite a few brands in the sector. Shell Recharge Solutions, Shell Energy, Zemetric, which is a startup, and Prologis Mobility. And so I guess we have a bit of a specialism in the sector. But we were actually, Frederick reached out to us because last year one of the big takeouts was that as an industry we needed to tell better stories, so passionate, authentic stories. And he kind of got in touch and he was like, you guys keen? We were like, yeah, absolutely. And as it turns out, we had some kind of clients in the Houston area and they came along. So it all just kind of, married up. So
stars aligned.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's interesting. We are indeed kindred spirits. Geoffrey and I are both writers by trade. And, the focus on story is somewhat ironic because on the one hand, it's something that has only recently been really talked about in our industry. And yet it's one of the oldest things that human beings have ever done is tell stories. And so to me, I've always felt in my own agency, we focus on the idea that, story is engagement. And I sort of wonder, that again, that's a timeless concept here, but can you tell us about sort of the evolution and sort of the uptake? Have clients for you been slow to embrace this notion of integrating story and narrative into their own marketing practices, or do they get it pretty quickly? How's that gone for you?
Well, as you say, story is something that people pick up pretty intuitively. They kind of know that it's somehow related to marketing. And I think one way that we kind of assuage the more rational-minded kind of client is we make a distinction between narrative and story. So narrative to us is a big overarching idea. It's story with time taken out. So you can build it a lot more logically, kind of using story logic. And by setting up an overall narrative, you can then decide what stories to tell that reinforce that narrative. So different channels, different objectives at that storytelling. So by separating story and narrative, we kind of assuage the more rational-minded that is quite predominant in this industry, and then the more creative communicators get their story, and it plays into that narrative construction.
What do you find is the biggest challenge with the energy companies wanting to tell stories? Do they want to tell stories? Do you find that that's something they're receptive to?
I think they need to tell stories because without stories being told, they're not going to be able to change beliefs, and without changing beliefs, they're not going to be able to change behaviors to affect the change that needs to happen. So I think there's definitely more of a kind of a surge in, I'd say, interest and kind of appetite to tell stories. But storytelling sometimes comes across as a bit soft, and it's like people don't think that it's very strategic. And I think that's where, as Ed mentioned, with narrative, there's definitely a strategic element to it that people can get their heads around. And then with story, you can kind of use the emotion to help affect this change through changing beliefs and behaviors.
To what extent does conflict then, as an element, have a place? Because most companies want to steer clear of anything negative or any, let's say, texture to any conversation they have about their product or about the world that they're living in. But you've already alluded to some of the problems that we're sitting here trying to solve, and I just sort of wonder if conflict actually has an important or healthy role to building narratives or executing stories.
I'd say it's imperative. It's not even important. It's like no conflict, no story. In a narrative sense, what you have is an opposition. So you have, people who are trying to achieve something, and then you got people who are opposed to that.
Things that are opposed.
Or things that are
issues, obstacles.
Yeah. And it's that tension that makes people lean in and keeps them engaged. And that doesn't necessarily have to be consumer facing. It's just something that sits within the brand, but it needs to be there in order to kind of provide that energy.
Right.
Gentlemen, tell us about the workshop that you just led here at Charge.
Yeah, it was, I think it's kind of a lot of information that we've been collating over the last few years. And it's totally relevant to this industry. And I think, we kind of took people through our narrative model, which is called Story Logic. And it was interactive. People constructed their own narrative for their brand. And I think, people came out of it having learned something, which is, I suppose the main thing you want in a workshop, something to, people going away with an idea of, or something, they learn something new and different. So I think, it's just a different way of approaching a problem or a task. It's a different way of thinking. It kind of, breaks a paradigm or, a kind of established way of thinking. So it unlocks different things for maybe, brand owners and marketers who are stuck staring at a thing every single day. They just can't really see the edges of it. They're lost. It's kind of like, snow blind. So, thinking in this way kind of just helps them kind of, look at things in a different light, and something pops up and they're like, wow, okay, that's interesting. I didn't think of it that way. So yeah, it was great. It was really, really good to get up and be able to kind of take folks through that.
First time at the Charge Energy Branding Conference this year?
Yeah.
Tell us your impressions. What do you think people should most know about the event?
I think we've always talked about is it better to turn up to an industry vertical, like an energy conference, or go to a, horizontal where everyone's about marketing. And this one's amazing because it's both horizontal and vertical. It's like, it's diagonal. It's like an industry, but it's brand. So it's really niche, but everyone's talking or wants to hear or talk about the same thing. So it's been really great for us to kind of find this pond to swim in, as it were.
Will you be attending Lisbon?
It's nice in Lisbon, yeah.
It's so close for you.
It is really.
I mean, you could drive.
Yeah.
Right, you could.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It's on the card.
Nice. Well, maybe we'll see you there. It's been a pleasure chatting with you both.